here today with Josh Valman. Josh, how are you, sir?
Yeah, very good, very good.
Lovely to see
Back from
you.
Christmas, trying to get back in the groove.
Yes, but shivering from the outside, so it's balanced around me. Um, Let me ask, you started designing and manufacturing at the age of 13. What sparked that interest? And I suppose, from my perspective, also the fact that we're seeing more and more young people have an interest in kind of the sort of areas that you're in. Do you see yourself as a kind of the forefather of them all?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but yeah, I mean, when I was 10, the big TV show was Robot Wars, which, as a 10-year-old, there's nothing more exciting than seeing people build robots and try and kill each other on TV. So that, to me, wasn't an engineering and an education thing. That was just madness, and it was something I wanted to get involved in, right? So I spent several years trying to play. So I turn up to these events, and you go to these things and you think, well, yeah, robots trying to attack each other is clearly a kids thing. This is not for adults at all, surely. It's purely for entertainment, but it's not. You turn up to these things, and it was just huge amounts of money, huge amounts of education. Everybody was a PhD or a very senior corporate engineer, and they had huge amounts of sponsorship. And I was 10, 11, right, when I turned up to these things. So I had bits of balsa wood and some masking tape and something else, and I'd turn up, and nobody sent me away, but I was definitely on a very different level to what people were doing. And because nobody sent me away, I just played, right? So very lucky that I was born at the right time for Google to start to be a thing back then, and I could pretty easily go, if I've got a specific problem, I can Google the question and get an answer. And so I built that experience and knowledge from just going, well, how do you do that? How do you do this? How does that maths work? What's that equation? And so you sort of managed to find an education that was 20 years my senior probably, but with very specific questions. But it was just fascinating, right? It was playing. It didn't feel like maths. It didn't feel like science. It felt like playing. And that all just got out of hand, really. I started making more and more complicated things. And because of all these people involved in robotics were, very senior corporate engineers, or they're involved in big projects, they'd say, oh, well, why don't you come and have a look at this? What do you think of this? And you'd sort of see enormous projects, very interesting things, very global projects as well. This wasn't people in sheds making interesting stuff. A lot of this stuff was big corporate businesses delivering the products that we use day to day, or the industrial stuff that makes the world work. And I was getting to see that quite early on, so it was exciting.
Sorry.
And that quickly got out of hand when people started asking me to go and work on things, and soon you get introduced to other people, and people stop asking how old you are, and I worked for years before I even left school in engineering, with nobody really knowing how old I was.
Can I ask kind of about that school kind of work balance? I suppose, and you mentioned it then. Kind of you went onto Google and you found videos, and these days you can find anything to learn about how to do anything on YouTube or whatever it was. That balance between your education, your formal education, and your practical education, I suppose, kind of, how did you deal with that? How did you Did you go to school every day and think to yourself, what am I getting out of here? Or did you find ways to actually kind of bring the two together?
It was conflicting, I'll say, because I was seeing the real engineering world, right? So I'm solving real problems, either for my own entertainment or as part of people that I was helping and playing on their projects. And I was seeing how the world works. And the difference between that and education, certainly in the UK, is that education in the UK is very theoretical, right? You learn maths, you learn physics, you learn any kind of engineering basics. It's always about, well, there's no friction, there's no air resistance, there's nothing, everything is done in isolation. And it's actually very hard, I think, very hard to learn when you don't have the relevance. So on one hand, it made schooling easier, because when you're doing, I don't know, differential equations, you go, okay, yeah, when I'm working a pressure vessel, I can understand that this is what that maths is for.
Yeah.
But when you don't have that relevance and you're sat there going, well, why would you ever want to work that out? How does that make any sense? And I don't think, I've always said I think the education system doesn't bring enough relevance to it. So on one hand, I did better at school because I could understand what this stuff was for. On the other hand, it drove me mad because I knew the big issue wasn't physics, the big issue was people or procurement or something else. And I remember having a massive argument and interview for university applications with a lecturer, because they asked me a physics problem, and they said, "Here's a new design for it was a wind turbine. Here's a new design for a blade for a wind turbine. What's wrong with this design?" And it was supposed to be some parabolic curve was incorrect or whatever else. But my answer was, it's procurement. It's new. It's different. Nobody's going to be able to buy it. Nobody's going to have to agree how to do it. It'll take 5 years for somebody to agree how we're going to launch this thing and actually implement change. The maths is irrelevant. We had a big old back and forth about that because I'd seen this world. I'd been part of it, and I realised that some of the best ideas that were brought forward by me or other people didn't go anywhere because people couldn't handle it. So it's a bit of a tangent to your question, but the reality is that education was difficult because you'd seen how the world works, and it wasn't quite like it is in the textbook.
And do you think kind of attitudes have changed at all? Not necessarily in education, but in procurement-y type areas towards new ideas. I mean, as we're going through the biggest period of change of all time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are talking about innovation. A lot of people are talking about how we make change. A lot of people want to change, right? It's very rare that you go into a business and they say, yeah, everything's fine, don't touch it. Quite often the risk is still something people are nervous of. But there's a lot of people trying to make change, and I think where people get stuck is the gap between having great ideas and actually going and doing something with them. And that's what I spend a lot of my time trying to do with businesses, is work out, well, how do you build a system that allows you to go and test and trial things and do it in a safe way that doesn't risk the entire business every time you want to go and play with something? Kind of bring the same attitude of experimentation that you have when you're young, because you don't think about the risks, right? When I was working with factories, when I was 15, 16 years old, I knew nothing about ISO standards. I knew nothing about really health and safety or anything else. I'd go, well, why can't we do that?
Yeah.
And everyone else would go, oh, because of this, because of that, because of this. And you go, yeah, but that doesn't really apply. And that's a bit of a shield, isn't it, to change? And is that actually going to be a problem? And these things are barriers because people expect them to be barriers as opposed to them actually being barriers. So whilst I think the attitude has changed from when I first started my career, where people didn't want to change, they were happy and they didn't want to make any difference. They now want to, and the next gap is, well, how do we actually go about doing that?
So I suppose my question off the back of that is, from your perspective then, what do you then, having experienced it and seen kind of people are more amenable to it, what then frustrates you now?
Just the difference between the talk and the action, right? It's quite often the thing that's frustrating is that people see innovation and change as a top-down thing, right? So particularly in large businesses, this should be something driven by the board. They'll tell you that we're going to have change, go, and then it's given to hundreds, if not thousands of people, and they go, change what? How? Because none of the systems have changed, none of the processes have changed. There's no space for change. But the board will sign off a load of money for investment in innovation and everything else, and somehow somebody will find a way to spend it, usually not on anything useful, and they call that a success. And actually, I think where it works best is when it works bottom up, right? So if you go into a business and you go and ask the board what's wrong in this business, they'll give you a list of things, but very rarely, if you were to look into it, would you find that be the actual answer. If you go into a business and you go and ask the people on the floor who sit in in the shop talking to customers, or they're on the customer services line, or they're actually delivering and maintaining equipment in the field, they are the people who know what's wrong. And usually those things are wrong are tiny, really, really small, but there's hundreds of thousands of them. And if you're going to change the way innovation works, it needs to be giving power to those people and building a program that allows those small bits of change from the people who actually know what's going to make a difference. Because those people tend to be incredibly frustrated in their roles because they know what the business should be doing. They know what's different. And I can't imagine there's many people that are going to listen to this and think, no, my business is fine. Everyone knows there's change needed and things have to move forwards. But very rarely is there a system in place that allows people at that level to actually go and make this change. So if you look at how do you get to the next step, it's about building frameworks and processes and things like that, but primarily building permission for people lower down a business to actually go and implement the change that they see required, as opposed to giving it all to a board member that comes in once every 2 weeks and doesn't really know what happens on a shop floor.
So let me ask you then, kind of, I suppose as a final question to you, is that if the management of a big company kind of said to you, okay, we want you to go and find out what we can, and you went to the shop floor and you spoke to the kind of the people who are working within the business, without the question being what's wrong, what is the one question that you think is the most salient question you could ask them to evoke what really needs to be done?
Tell you what, lazy people solve the world. So usually the right question is, what makes your life easier? Because usually the things that make people's lives easier are the things that actually make the whole business more efficient, saves time, saves money, and everything else. So if you don't go around going, how do we make the business another $100 million? Because nobody cares about that. You're not going to go and see $100 million bonus in your paycheck, are you? We go, what would make your life easier, more interesting, etc. These are the questions that actually go and find the right answers to what's changing the business, and they don't tend to be huge.
Josh, on that note, really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much for your time, and have a lovely day.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.